Welcome to TheHub, a podcast with the purpose of creating awareness, education, and engagement between the consumer base and colleagues. Hello. Welcome to TheHub podcast and today's episode. Thank you so much for being here, Ellie. One of my biggest fears is to have to do this thing on my own. I feel like I need a buddy to chat with. I can't have a conversation with myself all the time. So thank you so much for agreeing to be on.
Welcome. I am honored to be here and have this conversation with you.
Thank you. I'm honored to have you. Today's conversation is going to be fun, or so I think. Maybe as real estate geeks think that. I hope that our listeners and consumer base and our colleagues and anybody listening thinks the same. But before we get into today's topic, I want to remind you guys, so today we're going to be talking about rentals, right? Short-term, long-term, all the ways, all the terms. But it's important to disclose that we are speaking from experience.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You've got two experienced real estate agents and brokers on, and we're speaking from experience. We are in no way, shape, or form, telling you what to do, and this is the way it is. So just wanted to get that out there. The whole purpose of this podcast is to create awareness, education, right? It can also be an educational source, and engagement. We want to know what questions, it could be our fellow Yuma realtors out there or the consumers. We want to know what questions they have and how we can share the wealth of knowledge that we may have, right? So that's what we are all about. So again, thanks for joining us, and Ellie, thanks for being here. Quick intro. Miss Ellie Pruett has been licensed for 2.5 years, right? Going on 2.5 years here in Yuma. And you have a history in project management. What kind of project management did you do?
It was mostly all the financials, overseeing projects and making sure that they're meeting the objectives, making sure that we are spending our money wisely in government. So that was a huge chunk of the job that I had.
That sounds like pretty high stakes right there. Yes. So kudos to you. And then prior to that, very important, you served in the Marines.
I sure did.
So thank you for your service, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
We appreciate you. So now you know why I'm honored to have her here. This woman, is the whole package. So Ellie, today, I would like to take some time to touch on this topic, this very popular topic that is of short-term and long-term rentals. Maybe the verses, pros and cons of each. And at the bare minimum, simplify that to the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So I know that you own some short-term rentals yourself, right? Which is why I invited you on. I only own long-term rentals. I've never purchased. I'm a consumer of the short-term rental, right? I Airbnb places all the time. VRBO, Airbnb, very popular companies out there. So to kind of not make it so broad, why don't we start there?
Okay.
Talk to us about what are short-term rentals all about? I'm listening.
So it became really popular during COVID, and I think it was a quick way for a potential investor, maybe even a consumer, to really tap into that market. And it's not hard to set up an Airbnb. What's hard is the following, like after you set it up and after you've tried to set up systems. But I really think short-term rental, if we're gonna go ahead and summarize it into one little thing, it's like it's an investment opportunity to start creating wealth.
So let me break down what you're telling me, make sure that I'm understanding as well as the listeners. So to speak, it's an easy, right, a fairly easy investment opportunity. Could it be because it's you're already a homeowner, right? You own a property, therefore you're already a homeowner.
Right.
And I'm understanding that, it could be very easy to set a certain home up as an Airbnb or a short-term rental. Let's stick to short-term rental, right? That way we're not name dropping all over the place. But and then maybe move on to purchase another. And now, so although purchasing an investment property could sound like such a difficult thing to do, and it could, you can see the money signs all over. It was probably very easy or it could be a lot easier to acquire a property and keep the other one and start renting it out.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So from where I come from, and I may be very conservative when it comes to this, but that's how I started, right? It was like, I have this property and I'm gonna upgrade and buy another one, a little bit larger, because maybe I've outgrown this one, or I want to live in a different area. But instead of getting rid of this one, I'm going to keep it, and I'm just going to rent it out, right? Because especially in Yuma, rentals are popular, right? People, it's a through town, right? We've got military, we've got agriculture, right? And then we always have medical personnel coming in and out, right? Temporary positions, and that's just the beginning, right? So, so there's always a need for it. So is that kind of like what you mean?
Yeah.
That it could become easier, because if you already are a homeowner, it's almost just like taking that other step. And there's one tip that I'm sure you're aware of, but it's important to point out that as long as if you've owned a property and in order to buy a second one, you could still buy a primary as long as it's larger in square footage. So as long as you're upgrading in size, those down payments, right, which is what scares people a lot of times, the amount of money that they have to bring to the table to acquire another property. A lot of people, home ownership is the biggest investment we're ever going to make for the most part, right? So that percentage of down payment that's required for financing could be a little bit scary. So it's important that you're aware that if you are upgrading in size, that percentage can be that primary percentage, which can be lower. It doesn't have to be, 20%.
Right.
I think there's a huge misconception out there, right? People think you need 20% to buy a house.
And you don't.
Who taught you that?
Yeah.
Where?
Yeah.
Don't.
No, and you don't. And I just want to clarify, the reason why it became so easy for us was because we also had the VA loan. That in itself. So for all my veterans, all my military, that is such a great resource to tap into when you're just, I came from nothing.
Yeah.
And so being able to tap into a resource like that to just grow my portfolio, even if it's once a year or every 2 years, getting a property, being able to tap into a resource like that was so monumental in our investment journey.
So tell us about that. Let's take a little pause right there and tell us about how it works and for all veterans listening that may not be aware that I'm sure that they're aware that they have VA benefits, but maybe they don't know how to leverage them in real estate.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we purchased our very first home in 2018. This is before COVID. It was a beautiful home. We got a great deal. It was in the terraces, and we purchased it for $290, something like that.
The days.
So COVID happened. COVID happens. My husband's reading Rich Dad Poor Dad. I don't know if you've heard of
Good
this
book.
And one day he just tells me, he walks in the room. He's like, "Babe, we gotta change what we're doing. I want us to be millionaires." And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Never have we had even a conversation about money, much less being us.
You can say it.
Millionaires. And so I wanted to hear what his reasoning behind it all was, because I'm over here, I'm making good money. I want to spend. I have no reason to be saving. We make good money. And he was like, I want us to change the way we see money and the way we use it. And when he explained it to me and broke it down on how in 10 years, 15 years, we could essentially leverage the home we have or potentially other homes, I was like, it's a no-brainer. Let's go. Let's do, why wait to collect money for a down payment when we have this house to then buy another one? I still had my VA to use. let's just use my VA. We'll buy another primary home. We'll live there for however long we need to. Meanwhile, we turn this one into a short-term rental. And my husband was so against it at first, like, too risky, too much. And I said,
Oh,
no.
so he wanted to do things, but he wasn't buying your way of doing things?
I couldn't sell him on the Airbnb. And I was like, listen to me. This, I know it sounds risky, but I promise you, like, it's going to be worth it. And we worked our butts off to get that. Sure, I say it's easy, but I mean the acquisition part was easy because we had this.
So you were
benefit.
able to acquire. Okay, so at this point you had purchased your first home here in Yuma. You're living in it. You had purchased it with the VA, right? Which, for those of you who may not be aware, explain how the down payment portion works for that.
No down payment.
Zero.
Nothing. You don't pay.
It's a benefit that the VA offers.
It's a huge benefit. And because we were also the home was, so that's that. But the home was on the market for 6 months, more than that.
When you bought it?
When we bought it.
Okay.
So not only did we have to bring no money down, but the seller paid all. We had nothing to come to the table with.
So you were able, and this is the beauty of that, and I understand not everyone, we're not here to tell you that it's going to be like this for everyone, right? And let's talk about what if you didn't have VA availability, we can talk about that. But you were gracious enough to be able to acquire your first property with no down payment because of your VA eligibility, which you deserve, right? Thanks once again. And then given the market at that time and the property, key point to listen to so that there is no misconception created that seller has to pay all costs. In this case, the property had been on the market for 6 months.
Yeah.
At that time, a seller may be willing to pay concessions and more, right, in order to get it off the market and get it sold. So that was awesome. And then 2 years in, or how long in?
4 years in. So 2018 through 2021 is when we decided to make the shift. We said, that's when my husband came with Rich Dad, Poor Dad, mindset into the home. And I said, okay, you brought this in. I'm going to be the executor. And so that's what you
told me to do it. I'm going to run with it. So it's the middle of COVID, right? And you guys went out and bought a second property.
So we went and bought a second home. Now, I heard you mention something about square footage. This home was actually smaller. It was actually a downgrade.
Wow.
But what happened also was that at this point also, we didn't have 2 cars. It was just my husband's car. So it was a lot more convenient. This area that we moved to was more convenient because it was so close to the schools. So that's how we were able to get around that hiccup of like, it's a downgrade, but
I need to be closer to, which those exceptions exist as well. The easy route is like, okay, like saying I outgrew it and it's bigger, but yes, location and your commute is important, and banks will take that into consideration as well.
And they did.
So you bought a second home, and you are now prepping. So you're now establishing a new primary, and you're prepping your previous home for short-term rental.
Short-term rentals. This is all during COVID. We get COVID. It's a whole mess because we're trying to move out before Labor Day because we already have some bookings for Labor Day.
Gosh.
So there's just so much going on. On top of that, my husband also acquired a condo using conventional. Now, that was his route. So I think we were a little bit in competition of like, who's gonna get to, like, who's gonna show more properties? Oh God. Who's gonna show who first? And love you, baby, but I did show my husband first. That short-term rental.
Let's just not leave that out. She showed him first.
I did show him first. That Airbnb, the first month, we got booked by a large company that was willing to pay $9,000 for a month. So.
Oh my God, I love this. How much was your mortgage on the house?
The mortgage was
$1,600. You're booking it for $9,000 a month. I mean, you can do the math.
Yeah.
Right? You can do the math. And that cost you, so let's ignore the fact of the VA eligibility, right? Which helps with the down payment. But let's just break the numbers down for the normal buyer out there who's going to be buying with a 3.5%. Right? Let's say with an FHA loan or a conventional loan with 3% or 5%. At that time, what was the price of the home you bought?
The price was $299.
Okay, so $299. What's 3.5% of $299? Let's do some quick math because this is very important for our listeners. 3.5% of $299 is $10,465. So technically, these $9,000, right, that you're getting for rent in 1 month could almost buy you or aid you to buy the primary. Does that not make sense? Right? And this is why it was important for me to bring somebody in that is doing this and is current in doing so, right? It's not like, oh, it's been a long time. No, this is like, we're talking the last few years, guys. And this is how attainable it is. Yes. So quick point right there. Now, your husband went and bought
a condo
with conventional. How much did they require?
20% down.
Okay, which is good. Let's talk about
totally
that too.
Fine. Yeah, totally fine.
So he went about it. You do not want to talk about the condo.
It was totally against my advice, and I'm not an expert in real estate, but I do crunch numbers I crunched a lot of numbers for a living. So that to me, I was like, what are we doing? Why?
So that one, what did he buy the condo for?
He wanted to do long-term renting.
Oh, okay.
And it was a great little condo, but it needed a lot of work, and the tenant was not taking care of the home very well. And so I shared with my husband. I was like, I don't know if this is a tenant we can increase the rent to make it make sense for you. And we inherited the tenant essentially. But my husband was very adamant, like, this is it. You know, we're going to do this, and we used I didn't even know I had retirement money saved up, because I never paid attention to where my money was going. Again, making a lot of money. I don't care where it goes. I'm getting paid. So we found out I had about $15K, and then he had another like 8, 9, 10 maybe.
So there's your 20%.
So there was my 20%.
Okay.
And so
you leveraged your retirement and acquired another rental. So this 20%, this is where the 20% idea comes from. Yes, if you are going to purchase just, not a non-primary or an investment property, the banks are going to require 20, 25, 30%, depending, right? So in this case, he intended this to be a long-term rental. Right. Now, I'd like to speak on this because I really like long-term rentals, and I will tell you why. And I think the biggest difference is your goal.
Yes.
Your goal for, like, what is your purpose for this rental? So a short-term rental, it sounds like, and I do want to ask you about how you prep an Airbnb, so remind me if we skip over that to come back to that. But I see short-term rentals as a cash flow opportunity. That's how I see them. I may be right or wrong. I don't own any short-term rentals. And I see long-term rentals as a more passive long-term investment.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? So I like to buy long-term rentals for when I retire. It's like the easiest way that I can say it. I want to acquire the rental. I want to place a tenant, I want to fix it up and place a tenant in it and charge market value, collect market value for rent. And I really concern myself with, is the market value going to cover this mortgage, right? So what I do is, depending on the opportunity, if it's a rental that makes sense, I'll mortgage it from the get-go. I'll pay my 20%, okay with that, and I'll mortgage it from the get-go. If there's an opportunity to acquire it at a lower price by paying cash, then I may do that. And, then there's a period of time that you can wait and season it where you can get your entire money back if you want to wait that long, or if you want to get your money back quicker, then you will get about 70% of what you paid for it, right? Either way, it's almost like, 70 or 75%. It's almost the same as if you had paid that large down payment up front. But I am okay with investing that large sum of money up front because I rather put it in an appreciating asset, which is real estate appreciates over time. If you've ever seen a graph of the last 100 years in real estate appreciation, it's a mountain. It's an uphill, it's a mountain. So I'm okay with putting that money there rather than in the bank, right? Because it's appreciating. So it's growing. I'm not. It's not tangible, right? Not quickly. It's not liquid, but it's growing. So there's the difference. So I want to hear about how it didn't work out, or not that doesn't matter at this time, but it's a different goal.
Yes.
So if the goal is to cash flow, sometimes these long-term rentals are not going to work if that's your goal. But if they're covering, the mortgage and then some, I mean, I'll tell you that I have some rentals where the mortgage is a third of what the now rental market value is. A third, because of the time, the year that I purchased and what the value of the property was then, and how much it has appreciated over time. So my mortgage is based on when I bought it, the interest rate and what I bought it for. And some of my rentals bring in triple the amount of my liability. And another tip that I will give you guys is that since I'm not looking for cash flow, because I still work a lot, right? So I'm not looking for the cash flow off the rentals. I actually take those 2 extra payments that I'm collecting and I apply it to that mortgage, because that's how I'm going to finish paying that off quicker. Okay, so, and that's just my opinion. That's, and
no, that's awesome.
Anybody, if you want the cash flow, you need the cash flow. If I ever need the cash flow, I know that it's there. But it has helped those liabilities diminish, which of course, allows me to keep going. So that's a little bit of which I had planned to speak on, but the opportunity came about. So that's a little bit of the difference between short-term rental, long-term rental, both great opportunities, because both you're investing in an appreciating asset, right? Let's quickly go over appreciating versus depreciating assets. Real estate, appreciating asset, right? There's only so much of it, right? Do you want to give us an example of a depreciating asset?
Cars, purses.
That's what I was.
or shoes that you're gonna.
Vehicles. Vehicles. Toys. What do you call vehicles that you play with? What are those called?
You get the point. June buggies, whatever they're called.
You get it. I don't know my thing, but depreciating. Does that mean don't buy them?
No.
Doesn't. It doesn't mean don't buy them. It's just important to understand the difference between appreciating assets versus depreciating assets, and where you're investing your money given your goals, right?
Yep.
So I like cars too, which is, I know I'm a girl, but I don't like them for guy purposes. I just like to drive a nice car, and I understand that they're depreciating assets, right? So therefore, I didn't give myself the luxury of a luxury vehicle until I was like, okay, these goals first, and then I can, buy a prettier car or whatever, right? So that a little bit of information or advice for context, I guess. But let's go back into the topic of short term, and I want to hear, before we move on, I want to hear about how do you even prep? So now you've got the short-term rental, right? And how do you prep for that? How do you prep that property to make it successful at short-term rental? I think that's huge.
That is, I think a lot of it is going to come down to the research that you're doing as an investor, because I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to make this short-term rental and I'm going to furnish it, I'm going to make it pretty, without even looking at the competition. You have to look at your competition. You have to look what they're doing. How do their photos look? What amenities do they have? Do they have a pool? Do they have a heated pool? Do they have, you have to pay attention to the amenities. And one thing that I preach to my clients is get your butts on AirDNA, so you can snoop in.
What is that called?
AirDNA.
AirDNA, guys.
So airdna.com, it's pretty resourceful. You can pull information on different markets and sub-markets. So for example, I'm looking at Yuma, and you can pull information on the listings that are out there on Airbnb or Vrbo that have pools. How many rooms do they have? What are the amenities? Do they allow pets? Do they not allow pets? And you can pull the data for those properties and then assess, okay, how does their occupancy rate look? What is their average daily rate look like? And these are things you want to pay attention to. And I always share with my clients, like, okay, if you have your eyes on a property, make sure it has the amenities that your competition has, and then assess if this property even makes sense for you. Because if the numbers are ridiculous and your average daily, your average occupancy is only, I don't know, 50%, and the average daily rate for that type of property is $100, you're only going to make a certain amount. And is that amount going to cover your mortgage and the expenses?
Right.
So there's a lot of dissecting. So to prepare a successful Airbnb or short-term rental, it's really going to come down to the person or the investor and then the research that they're doing.
Yeah.
Because I can only do so much for you as as your agent and say, did you look at this? Did you look at that? But you have to do your own diligence and look at your competition, because when you set up your Airbnb, I'm not setting it up for you.
Right.
I'm getting you the
selling it to them.
I'm selling it. I have not, and I hate to say it like that, but
maybe they'll hire you to set it up.
Maybe they will, but my job right now is not setting up Airbnbs. My job is to advise you. So, do your research, pay attention to what your competition is doing, and then from there, assess what can I add to stand out? What can I do to stand out? And
I love it. And to me, it makes total sense, right? It makes total sense that you need to look at the landscape out there, right? You need to do the research, look at the landscape. What is this going to look like for me? Right, I'm smacked right in between such and such short-term rental, and they're charging so much, right? It sounds simple to me, but it doesn't to somebody it's the first time they're doing it.
Right.
It doesn't sound simple to somebody who doesn't have the experience. And here's where we come in handy. And in a prior podcast, we were talking about the value of the realtor. And these are some of the values that are, they're not invaluable, I guess. It's like you can't put a dollar on a dollar figure on it, right? Why? Because this is what we do day in and day out. Real estate is our industry. It's our livelihood. So, the doctor may not be as equipped to identify the proper investments as the realtor may be. Just like the realtor is not equipped to be writing prescriptions. Girl, right? I'm not going to self-medicate because I don't know what I'm taking, right? So makes total sense to me, and it's very important to gather all of that information and research prior to. I think a lot of times when we make up our minds, kind of like your husband and you did at the beginning, you're like, let's do this. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad and I'm doing this. Let's do it and let's jump right in. The excitement sometimes can blur our vision or distract us because we want to do it, and by human nature, when we've got something in mind, right, we want to execute. That adrenaline is there driving. The adrenaline drives us, and maybe it blurs our vision sometimes. So very, very important, guys, to run numbers, compare, inform yourself, and then be very honest with yourself and patient, passive and patient in finding the right one, especially for your first one, right? That it will be a success story, And if it ever isn't, the beautiful thing about real estate, again, is that real estate is an appreciating asset. So if things don't work for your purpose, for your goal, you can sell. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So that's... it's a little bit, in my opinion, real estate is the safest place to put your money. Like personally, the stock market, scares me a little bit because there are things there that I don't know, that I don't study. If I did, I'd be a little bit more daring, right? So I like to put my money and my investments in what I know, which is essentially what you're saying. Oh my gosh, so much more information than I thought coming into this topic. I feel like we've only skimmed the surface.
Just a little bit,
But in an effort to not sit here for hours and hours, and of course this episode comes with the purpose of awareness. Yes. Right? Awareness and a little bit of education. This one or two scenarios that we've been able to get through should give you an idea, or at least like the little, itch.
Interest.
Yes, the interest and itch to want to learn more about it. And what is my place in this real estate market? Do I own any real estate? Do I own my primary home? And am I ready to take the next step and scale into a second one, right? Do I not own anything? Do I own a couple and maybe I'm sitting on a bunch of equity that I could leverage and multiply? So let's wrap up with that aspect of it. If you don't own real estate yet, Ellie, what would be your advice to a consumer out there that, you know, doesn't own a piece of real estate yet?
My advice, and this is one I actually I had an experience with a potential buyer, no real estate, but they want to get into investing. And my advice to them really was, let's have a conversation about where your mindset is at. Let's talk about your risk tolerance, because I think a lot of people get into investing, they watch a lot of podcasts, they see a lot of these millionaires, self-made billionaires, whatever, you know, they want to get in those ins, and sometimes it's a matter of like this, it takes time. Like I'm still in year 3.5 and we're barely even making like it consistent. Right now it's very consistent, very stable. So it takes time. So my advice to that future investor would be like, let's assess where you are mentally. And I think this is a great conversation that you always like preach to us too as our broker, and I always appreciate these conversations. Is where's your mindset at? Even as a real estate agent, where is your mind at? Like get your mind in the right place. Understand what you're going to get into. And sometimes all it takes is time and aligning yourself with the people that you foresee yourself. This is who I want. This is something I would like to achieve. Where they are is where I'd like to be. And listen to those people. Don't go crazy.
So technically make up your mind. Like make that decision of, I don't own a piece of real estate yet and I want to. And sometimes, like I said, that excitement gets us to kind of skip a step.
It does.
So I think we probably both agree, like my advice would be own something for you. Own a piece of real estate for you. Right? And start, living it. Buy it, live in it. Because if you're not living in it, you're probably paying rent, right? And here we are, and we listen to this day in and day out, right, from buyers. The interest rate is too high. Ellie, enlighten us into what's the interest rate on a rental when you're renting?
Yeah, it's 100%. You're either paying down your mortgage or you're paying someone else's.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I can say it in so many different ways, guys. The interest rate on paying rent is 100%. So when I hear that 7 or 8, for God's sakes, 10% is too much to pay, I'd rather pay the 10% than the 100, personally speaking, right? That should not be the issue, right? As long as you're buying within your means. So figure out what those means are, right? With growth, it takes compromise. So sometimes you might live in this very pretty rental, but you're paying 100% interest. And maybe your budget calls for a less pretty or less comfortable, I don't know, home that you will own, right? So that's one way to look at it, right there. Now, if you own real estate, another piece of advice that I can give you, if you already own one and you're struggling or pondering with the idea of how to scale but really can't put your finger on it, best advice I can give you is go to a professional that can help you identify what that next step to allow you to scale will be, right? But personally, a piece of advice that I do want to give you is also that, I have a lot of these conversations as well with the attachment of your first home. And especially I'm Hispanic, and a lot of people in my community, we get very attached, to our first home or to our family home. And I get it, if your children were born in that home and, all of these memories have been created. And this is where I'm going to sound very cold-hearted. The Trina bill is coming out. Don't get attached to your first home, because your first home, from a real estate investment standpoint, and again, only listen to me if you are interested in scaling and investing in real estate, your first home is your stepping stone.
Yeah.
Your first home will open up all of these opportunities. And I'll give you a very simple example. If you bought your home in, I'll use an example. I bought my first home in 2008.
Wow.
2008. I bought my first home in 2008. I paid a whopping $156,000 for this home. That same home right now, I can drive by it. And that home is worth an easy $350, right? Mm-hmm. So it didn't only double, but then some, right? Mm-hmm. I don't have that home anymore because, again, I'm heartless when it comes to I don't get attached to to real estate as much. That's a joke. I'm not heartless.
No, you're not.
But if I had not sold that first home, which it hadn't appreciated as much yet when I sold it, right? When I sold it, it was in the 200s. But that money allowed me to buy another one. And another one. So I took that cash and I applied it. There was my 20% down payment for a couple of more. Mm-hmm. So had I not done that other rental that I said that triples right, that the rental amount collected is triple what the mortgage is.
That's awesome.
It wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
So that first home from 2007 that I did not grow attached to, that I later sold and took the equity out of, bought me multiple rentals that now are paying for themselves.
Yeah.
They're not only of service to a tenant that at this time needs to rent because they're not ready to purchase yet, but they're of service for, the 60-year-old Nabil who'll need to retire, and we're all independent, so where's that retirement coming from, right? So, and all of this is being said, the whole episode is to encourage us to think about where is my place? Where's my place in real estate? What am I doing? What have I secured for my future, right? And ask questions, to people like us or any realtor that you know and trust, friend, family member, so on and so forth. There's hundreds of them in our community. So that you can get your piece of real estate and scale, right, and prepare yourself for your future. So I hope that we did somewhat of a good job at unpacking a little tiny bit of this topic, which is, again, we're very passionate about. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, Ellie.
Thank you.
I think that we could potentially have a subsequent episode about more, because we literally scratched the surface, but there is just so much to be said, right? Yes. At least if we really want to provide the understanding, right? Yeah. Because it may be easy for us to understand, but not to everybody that doesn't, breathe and, sleep and
love real
estate. Yeah. So I want to thank you guys so much. Thank you for being here with me and sharing this with me. And thank you guys for listening. Remember to like and subscribe, and you can find us on all of the podcast platforms. And we'll see you next episode. Thank you so much.
Bye.